After America is made on the lands of the Bunurong and Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nations. We pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded.
We are in a battle for the soul of America.
This is a fraud on the American public.
Hi, I'm Emma Shortis, and this is After America. The Trump administration doesn't really do circumspect, but last week it had a go at pretending. Hostilities with Europe seemed to simmer down. It moved on Bovino, the man leading the deadly ICE occupation in Minnesota, and they didn't even pick one of Donald Trump's children to be the next chair of the Federal Reserve. But this isn't really a back down. Trump didn't just wake up one morning and decide it's time for good, solid government that respects the rule of law. ICE hasn't left Minnesota, and the next target is Springfield, Ohio.
What they have done to our country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame.
After his grotesque lies about that city in his presidential debate with Kamala Harris, Springfield is now at the heart of the Trump administration's plans to unilaterally strip 500,000 Haitians of their legal status in the United States. When there is no rule of law, no one is safe. The MAGA movement is literally and symbolically destroying the promise of a post-civil rights America. This week, I'm joined by Don Watson. He's the author of several works on America, including the excellent Shortest History of the United States of America, which was released late last year. We discuss what Don learned about the United States throughout the writing process, Trump's radical vision for reshaping America, and why, regardless of what happens to the president, the MAGA movement isn't going anywhere. Don, welcome back to After America. It's wonderful to have you back.
Oh, thank you.
Don, you have just gone through the incredible process of writing a shortest history of the United States. It's quite the time to write that, and it does really an incredible job of showing how Trump and the moment that the United States is in is really a product of history and shows all of those through lines, I think, with Trump. But I wanted to ask you, knowing so much already about the United States, what you learned about the US.
Well, the first thing I learned, I think, was that I know so little about the United States. If you wanted to find out how little you know, write the shortest history of the place. And since then, I keep coming across articles, phrases that I realise I've neglected. For instance, I have constantly seen the words Mason-Dixon line, the famous Mason-Dixon line, that I'm sure I didn't mention in the history. I haven't been game to go back and check, but I'm pretty sure it never came up. And no doubt if the book ever gets reviewed, someone will mention that there no Mason-Dixon line appears. How can you possibly have a history of the US without the Mason-Dixon line? And so on. Anyway, the book in a way was, paragraph by paragraph was an attempt to sort of distill into not quite haiku, but it was a sort of effort at distillation. And it was, you can write, the sort of nerdish history of the United States, basically, what went on in Washington over, and with the main characters front and centre. And that is at one level is unavoidable. But the other thing I wanted to do, to bring it alive, you need to put more quotidian stuff in and a little more eccentric stuff. But you can't go too far there, or people say, why the hell have you got this character in there and you haven't got the Mason-Dixon line? You had to somehow give it texture. It was peculiar in that sense because, you can't feel pain, you can't remember how painful writing is afterwards. Otherwise, we really wouldn't take it on again.
It's like childbirth.
Yes, yeah. I wouldn't go there because I would not assume. I would not assume. But now it seems to me like it was a very interesting exercise. At the time, I remember it was a very painful and difficult exercise and shouldn't have taken as long as it did. But I got hung up on the Spanish, and I'd never read much about the Spanish in the Americas. I knew it was pretty horrible. but not as horrible as it turns out to be. Trump has, of course, revived the Spanish or the Spanish-American wars by his actions in Venezuela and blowing up boats in the Caribbean of apparently, in many cases, quite innocent fishermen and casual workers and so on going home.
America will reclaim its rightful place as the greatest, most powerful, most respected nation on earth, inspiring the awe and admiration of the entire world. A short time from now, we are going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, and we will restore the name of a great president, William McKinley, to Mount McKinley, where it should be and where it belongs.
And as he's, revived tariffs, he's discovered William McKinley, which must be very gratifying to McKinley's descendants because he'd been pretty much forgotten. But Trump's pulled him out of the great Valhalla of American presidents and found McKinley, and with a new Monroe Doctrine, or Donroe Doctrine, as he calls it. It can be a bit glib to say, oh, well, this was all there and Trump is just simply a perfectly natural growth on American culture and history, because he's not quite. And it's irresistible to say how strange, the country begins with the removal of a mad and tyrannous king, and here we are again. So while it's glib, it's also true. The other historical pattern that is at work here is the one that sort of began with Woodrow Wilson probably, but more specifically it found its full expression in FDR, and that is a loathing in the United States among many, many people, including a stack of economists, for liberalism, so-called. That is the liberalism of state intervention that FDR and Wilson, they've hated it for decades and believe that this is a sort of misappropriation of what America really is, and it's a terrible path they've taken. And that sort of rugged individualist notion that God meant America to be the place where the individual found his fullest expression of his freedom. So it becomes a sort of holy war against liberalism. And I think that's what you now see somehow transmogrified into MAGA, into people who have none of the theology of this movement, but have all of the passion.
And the violence.
And the violence.
Well, yeah. I mean, given all that, given that the historical trajectories and the mess of contradiction and the divisions that you're talking about, particularly the hatred of liberalism that's, I think playing out in the streets of Minneapolis, and particularly in the reaction to those killings of two, I guess almost perfect candidates for the liberals that the MAGA movement hates. And
including a woman.
Exactly, yeah. And
a fucking bitch, as they called her as she died.
It's, appalling in the way that, Alex Pretty as well has been set up as this almost a race traitor, I suppose, by that movement. Given all that, given, what you can see, what we can observe about this movement, and a year in, I suppose, to the second Trump administration, it's maybe an unfair question, but where do you see this heading? Because it doesn't seem like it's heading anywhere good.
No. I mean, apart from the Mason-Dixon line, I'm going to be saying I don't know a lot in this conversation because unlike everybody else I read, I don't know.
But that's such a good thing to say, Don. It's so rare to say that. And we're surrounded by such certainty about what's going to happen, and by people who are so certain about things and continue to be wrong.
That's right. It doesn't matter. Day after day, it goes on. And we go on faithfully reading and hoping that we're going to strike gold one day. I think this much we can say for certain, that even if Trump falls down dead tomorrow, MAGA and the people, the Millers and the Vorts and the Bannons and the rest of them, and are not going to go away.
Mm.
And it's actually, every day it is becoming more solidified and less likely to go away. They're sort of, in a sense, becoming battle-hardened, not just on the streets of Minneapolis, but I think in their minds. War has been declared in a way. It's getting closer to that sort of position. So while I wouldn't say, although it's extraordinary how many liberal or even, conservative analysts are talking about civil war. I don't think, and I never have thought, that was a likely proposition, although it may be a sort of a state of semi-war in various parts of the United States.
It's messier than a straightforward.
Absolutely. Because I can't work out, say the Democrats win the midterms, and they may not. The Trump people have a way of breaking things up in classic fascist tradition, actually, that you just keep reducing it to a set of binaries that in the end your opposition becomes fragmented.
I mean, I think we can see them doing that now with what is often being framed as a kind of a withdrawal or a reset around Minneapolis, where they've, fired the Nazi trench coat wearing head of ICE, Bavino, I think his name is, and that's being treated as a Trump retreat. He's retreating in the face of opposition and tanking public approval ratings. But I mean, he hasn't really. Like, the ICE agents are still there. They're threatening they're going to go into Springfield, Ohio fairly soon. Trump is a master of slightly recalibrating, but not actually changing what he's doing and sort of disconcerting or dispersing opposition in the process.
Yes, and the media now works in such a way that he only needs to sort of say a few things, call in, Christy Noem.
Christy Noem, yeah.
And the pressure comes off, and people, he's rethought this and it'll be all right in a little while. But the pressure hasn't come off in other places, including in social media or on Fox or wherever. So this is new in a way, that it can be made to look as if you've rethought it, you have recalibrated. But what you've recalibrated is only the daily tactic, not the long-term plan. And they've become very good at this. And they've got another 3 years to get even better. So that's in a way, the problem. If the Democrats do win the midterms, it's hard to see where the leadership is going to come from in Congress or nationally, because the Democrats are woefully ideologically split, and it's hard to see how a Schumer and an AOC are going to find common ground and who is going to stand up and represent the Democrats there, whether it's a governor or whatever. So who is going to lead, I don't know. And how would you break down where the real power of the Trump hordes lies? I mean, what do you do about the Department of Justice, which has now become a kind of weapon of Trumpism? What do you do about the Supreme Court? What do you do about a whole lot of other things which are now, firmly entrenched? And in a way, when the Democrats get elected, that will harden the battle lines, given the stance of the Trumpistas. Sometime in the next 3 years, Vance's ambitions are going to have to be realised more and more. Now, how's he going to do that? He won't be running towards the centre, I wouldn't think. So that's, I don't know. But it's very hard to see how all this is going to dissolve, and we'll be back to some kind of, glory days of Rockefeller republicanism. It just ain't going to happen.
And I mean, it sounds like you don't have a lot of hope that the Democrats will get themselves together, because, I mean, the grassroots resistance to Trump, particularly in the progressive wing of the party, is significant. And I mean, as much as we talked about, Trump's not recalibrating or walking back, like, that's not to take away from the physical, united, organised resistance, on the streets of Minnesota or from people like Ilhan Omar, who's like literally taking it to people who are attacking her in pretty extraordinary scenes.
Oh my God, he sprayed something on her. I need a napkin to know nothing. No, we'll go. No, we will continue. No. Ilhan, you need to go get checked. No, we will continue. These fucking assholes are not going to get away with it. You need to go get checked. No, please don't let them have the show. Here is the reality that people like this ugly man don't understand. We are Minnesota strong, and we will stay resilient in the face of whatever they might throw at us.
How can that disjunct between that part of the party and the rest of it, the sort of senior New York Democrats like Chuck Schumer, how does that stand?
I don't know. That's the story. I mean, but it's. I guess we can say this, that it's one of the mysteries of American politics that where does the leadership come from? Who is going to be the Democrats? Who's going to represent the Democrat position? I don't know how that's going to work. In a way, it's a pity they couldn't have their primary now and decide who's going to be the person and let everyone else fall in behind.
Yeah, and have an actual opposition leader.
Yeah. Minneapolis is interesting in a way. It's heartening, and I think Democrats have been greatly heartened by it. The fact that it's coming out of the Midwest gives it the kind of gravitas that it mightn't get if you were getting it in New York or Massachusetts or somewhere, or even California. But it's, this is Cassandra-like, I suppose. But I mean, I think this has also hardened the battle lines for the other side. In a way, if, as some people think, the moment of glory that Trump is hoping for is to be able to invoke the Insurrection Act to go back to our
Miller's
history again.
Gagging for it.
So the more the Democrats resist on the streets, or the more the people resist on the streets, the closer we get to that. Then we have a real free-for-all.
And I mean, in many ways, it's pretty extraordinary, especially given the history you go into in the book and show how that violence is really baked into the American story. I mean, in many ways, it's pretty extraordinary that it hasn't been more violent yet, that the resistance in particular hasn't gotten more violent.
It feels like a matter of time, really. And, if you watch American films, modern America, I watched one last night, terrific film, but so much violence, so much gunplay, so much bang, 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 everyone bringing a gun down the back of their trousers. They're everywhere. The fact that the man murdered in Minneapolis was carrying a gun is interesting in itself. Fantastic to hear the Republicans talk about the wickedness of a man carrying a gun. Really beyond.
It feels, I've said this on the show before, it feels so ridiculous now to point out the hypocrisy, but it is really shocking.
Yeah. But I think that's a sign of how divided the country is, that that on one side of the country they don't hear or see the hypocrisy, they simply see our side. That's when the mental state of the country feels sort of irretrievable. That is the most concerning thing. They're now in the door, they're in the house. How do you get them out? Particularly since the house seems to be, fairly feckless. They don't know. They haven't got many ideas. And they're arguing over the kitchen table while I'm not going to push this metaphor any further. I'll end up with a Mason-Dixon line.
Well, I mean, you asked the question, Don, like where does leadership come from? And, internally at least it seems, in Congress, it seems pretty feckless. But a lot has been made of potential leadership coming from the outside. And we've talked about it on the show a lot, but, particularly the speech by Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney.
Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. We shouldn't allow the rise of hard power to blind us to the fact that the power of legitimacy, integrity, and rules will remain strong if we choose to wield them together.
I think I'd probably not out of bounds in saying you love a good speech. What?
Well, it's so rare to hear one these days.
But what did you make of Carney?
I thought it was, well, there are a couple of things that came out of it that I thought were so interesting. One is that it's very hard it was hard 30 years ago to get a headline with a speech. It meant to be it had to be a bad, kind of no news day to get the front page. But Carney, the timing was perfect, and he hit a whole lot of high points. And it's a good speech because it said what people have been craving in a way, and that's what a good speech does, or an effective speech. I thought the reactions to it were fascinating in Canberra, where Jim Chalmers went on the air and said, "My God, what a wonderful speech, a marvellous, marvellous, marvellous speech," and then was completely silent after that, and along with the rest of the government. Great speech, nothing to do with us. But the other interesting thing was, and it came up in a couple of contexts, I saw American analysts saying, if Canada thinks it can, here it is talking about liberalism, but it wants to get into bed with China, for God's sake. I mean, how outrageous is that? And someone said the same thing when asked if Australia might follow the Canadian example or the European example, maybe. I thought, well, this is extraordinary for coming from a country that's got into bed with the Saudis, which is kind of half in bed with Putin most of the time. I mean, weird, really, to be sort of telling people that dealing with China has got to be out of the question because it's an authoritarian regime. But these things go down and no one really questions them. You'd like to think that the Carney thing was a turning point. And I mean, immediately Besant came out and said, Carney's walked it back. It just wasn't true. But, this is a good way to do it. We'll just say that he's walked it back. Well, he hasn't. Anyway, whether it will sort of galvanise what remains of the Western world, I don't know. But there I go again. But thank God it was made, I think.
Well, I mean, I had real hope, probably naive hope, but hope nonetheless that it would be a moment, that if even Canadian Prime Minister can say these things, then surely Australia can. And I mean, hopefully we can get back to Australia. But I mean, it fairly quickly became clear as well that, Carney's rhetoric wasn't necessarily matched up by the substance of what he's doing, because he's also, even in the speech, he talked about cutting corporate tax and is, from what I understand, implementing sort of austerity measures in Canada. So that's not, that doesn't seem like the kind of leadership that we're talking about or that people are craving either. It's a rhetorical leadership, but maybe not substantive.
Well, the worry is for Canada and the Europeans, and I suppose to some extent for us, if Europe and Canada were to increase its defence spending by several magnitudes, like if you're going to go from 1.5% to 5% or something, money's got to come from somewhere, and you can be pretty sure it's not going to come out of the corporate world. It'll come out of social services, to which, as the right wing says, Europeans are addicted, and Canadians to some extent, and no doubt we as well. That creates all sorts of potential for trouble in those countries. You can't just do it overnight. Bingo. It's going to be hard. I think it raises another question too, and that is what AI is going to do. This is where, if you want to really have, the hair stand up in the back of your neck and bang your head on the wall. But if AI leads to pretty substantial unemployment, which it seems to me it's bound to do, despite what they might be saying, at least for a while, or if the bubble bursts, if you suddenly have, in other words, if you suddenly have a deep economic recession at least, then I don't know what happens. Here I go again. But that would be very, very worrying, I think, because you don't know what the political implications of social upheaval would be. They're rarely good.
And I think one of the most worrying things viewed here from Australia is that it doesn't appear as though the Australian government is willing to even really acknowledge that those questions exist. Especially when it comes to our relationship with the United States. in all its forms, in its economic form, but particularly in its military form. With AUKUS hanging over us, it doesn't seem like they'll change course.
No, and I find that really irritating, strangely enough.
That's one way of thinking of it. Yeah.
Because I think, the alliance and AUKUS and our whole defence posture, our foreign policy is increasingly, it seems to me, quarantined from the people, that we're left out of it entirely. AUKUS has rarely been discussed. I mean, I think, if you ask somebody what they think about AUKUS, you can say, well, how would I know? Because it's just been put there in front of us, And the silence, that was the interesting thing about Carney, because Carney was like dropping a rock in a pool. Like suddenly we have to face up to this. And he uses a word like rupture. It's not a pleasant word. We avoid that at all costs. AUKUS has not been debated in this country. It's not been even vaguely put to any kind of popular analysis or judgment. And much like the alliance, which is debated at one level, a number of people, including yourself, questioning that, can't we think about this differently? But that doesn't get into the broader political debate. It's left alone. And there is no one in either party in the actual parliament questioning it. You just never hear a boo from anybody. Even as America becomes an entirely problematic place with a problematic leader and a new Monroe Doctrine, that doesn't affect us. So I don't know. I don't know where any of that goes, but it probably won't go anywhere, because that is our sort of the stasis at the moment, I think, in Australia. And I think we're mesmerised by what's happening in the US and Europe and everywhere else in the world. We watch all the time. I feel guilty of the same. I read the New York Times. Everyone reads the New York Times now. Well, you can't blame them when you see the age. But it's and the Sydney Morning Herald. So that's another question about what's happening in Australia. What's happening on the coalition side of politics. But we are like mesmerised by the US, and to the extent that we don't really think about where we sit in the ourselves, whether this country might be unravelling in certain central parts of our national life. Whether, for instance, our brief flirtation with multiculturalism and the value of tolerance, and whether, we have an opposition now going on about immigration, much as they are in the United States. No one seems to be putting the case for immigration on the side of politics where you would think it ought to be made. What are they saying? We don't have any more immigrants for however long? What would happen to the country if immigration stopped? It's funny, actually, everyone rooting for Alex de Menor, whose father was Uruguayan, his mother was Spanish. But he's Australian, right? But he wouldn't be here.
This is a tennis reference for any listeners who might not know it.
I only realised this the other day when I was watching him. But the national conversation is, more broadly, doesn't seem to be being had.
And it is, desperately needed. Don, we're running out of time, but because I've got you here, I would like to just ask you if there's anything else that you want to tell us about. The floor is yours.
I've been reading this book about Vermeer. This is philosophical advice for your listeners. And I knew nothing about Vermeer except I loved his paintings. And he only did 34 paintings. Died when he was 43. But this wonderful book describes what he came out of while this And he basically came out of sort of a reversion to sort of early Christian, a sect that sort of practiced a kind of early Christian, no church Christian religion. But what's so interesting about him is that he, in a time of extraordinary discontent and warfare and massacre and the horrors of the Spanish in the lowlands of Northern Europe, and out of that, Vermeer paints 34 pictures, mainly of women and light coming in the window. They're sort of wonderful, they're still sort of timeless souls and women. And you think, well, maybe that's the solution. I'm sorry to get it all spiritual here. It's not my way, but every now and again you think, maybe you just have to stand still and not let this drive you mad, you know. But it also says something about, you know, in those horrible massacres conducted in the early 17th century, then, of course, Europe, they do it all the time. They're all done by men. There's very little evidence of women leading massacres, but men are doing it all the time, and they butcher everybody. As soon as they get through the fortifications, they butcher everybody inside, men, women, children, everything. And Vermeer sort of seems to sort of look at it and think, actually, if you want to find what's actually more likely to prevail on the good side of humanity, you've got to look at women. So he has them standing looking out the window. Maybe that's not the way he thought it through, I don't know. But they still sort of, you know, sing now when nothing else is singing at all. So I found that quite fortifying to read this. That's not to sort of say that we should be passive and but if you have, it is so hard to feel positive about the way things are going. And I think it's harder still if you have some notion of history. Yeah. I really do. I mean, you know how bad things can be. And it's very hard to get up in the morning sometimes when you think about it, particularly if you open up, you know, the New York Times before you get out of bed. But that's sort of Vermeer's conversation, it seems to me, that you've got to find some, and maybe it's Ilhan Omar or someone Vermeer women wear that sort of headdress that she will. So that's about all. That's the most positive thing I can think of saying at the moment.
That was very positive, Don. I think we all, I know I need reminding that there is still beauty to be found in the world and cultivated and lifted up. So thank you for doing that with us. For someone who doesn't know, I always find the conversations with you illuminating and fortifying. I do come away from them feeling better, even if less positive sometimes about the state of the world.
You must bring out the best in me, I think, Emma.
I hope so, Don. Thank you, as always, for your time and your generosity.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us for this week's episode. You can save $5 off our latest book, A Time for Bravery, What Happens When Australia Chooses Courage, with the code POD5, that's POD5. Don's extraordinary book, The Shortest History of the United States of America, is linked in the show notes. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on the show. You can reach us via our email address, which is podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au. This episode was recorded on Friday, the 30th of January. After America is supported by the Andrew Farron Foundation and produced by Angus Blackman. We'll be back next week. I'm Emma Shortis. Thanks for listening.